Welcome to one of the largest-scale land restoration projects on the planet. Before this work, people relied on food aid just to survive. But 10 years ago, a vast barren wasteland began to transform, and now 500,000 people are feeding themselves from this land. So could this work be the key to ending hunger in Africa and beyond? Let's find out. I'm traveling in the Sahel of Africa with the largest humanitarian agency on Earth, the United Nations World Food Programme, the first responders to hunger in war zones and disasters. But what I came here to see is the mind-blowing work they are doing to actually solve hunger by fixing the underlying problem. When soils blow away and the land desertifies, people can't feed themselves. But what I'm witnessing here is the repair of soils and water across Africa at a scale I never imagined possible. This is Africa's Great Green Wall, where a massive strip of trees is being planted across the continent to hold back the Sahara Desert. But the places I visited are not ones that just anyone can access. Entry is tightly controlled. The WFP works wherever there is hunger in the world, and they invited me along on this mission to tell this critical story that almost no one knows about. In this 4-part series, I'm explaining the details of some of the most important work of our time. We are here in Niger, Africa, known as NA. In this nearly 5-square-mile block of land restoration, 5 different villages planted about 100,000 trees and put in about 20 tons of grass seed. We can see the land starting to come back to life. But will the plants survive? The key is to make sure they get enough water, but that's not easy in a desert. This region experiences what's called the drought-flood cycle. 9 dry months leave the land parched, and when the rains finally come, the water can't soak in. Instead, it rushes down and creates flooding in lowlands. In the Sahel, however, there exists an age-old water harvesting structure called the half-moon. This simple structure has the capacity to store water and hold it until it soaks into the ground. There are different variations of these half-moon structures, and the choice depends on the end goal, whether creating a forest, a grassland, or millet-growing area. It also depends on how well the soils hold or drain water. The basic idea is that half-moons are laid out on contour and dug to intercept water flowing downslope during heavy rains. Deep pits, called ZY pits, are dug inside and outside the half-moon. These pits collect organic matter that blows or flows into them, allowing for deep rainwater soakage. Often, a tree is planted alongside grasses and other seeds that germinate with the rains. Birds and wind bring in more seeds, and the half-moon becomes a concentration point for water, nutrients, plants, and animals. The ecosystem grows, and life returns. This method is astoundingly simple, but how does it work in practice? Here, we see a site that is just 1 year old, and another that has been developing for 8 years. The rows of half-moons with planted trees are now forming a canopy over the ground. Grasses cover the earth, and even now, there is water in these half-moons. The presence of different local plant species and grasses provides good animal feed. The shade from the trees reduces temperatures by 5 to 8 degrees compared to untreated areas. This is one of the best ways to improve food security because, at the end of the day, it creates a food basket while also nourishing the land that nourishes people. But how does this restoration create food? When land is restored, it produces grasses that feed livestock, providing people with milk to drink and meat to eat. The native Sahel trees produce leaves and fruits that tough camels and goats can eat, even in times of need during the long dry season. These trees provide shade, hold the soil, soak in water, and nourish livestock. What I had seen so far looked promising, but this was still a young site that hadn't fully developed. I couldn't help but wonder, can a system like this really be enough to end hunger? To find out, I needed to visit the most successful site they could show me, near the southern border with Nigeria. This border is porous, and militant groups sometimes cross over, so we needed a military escort. But visiting this mature site was crucial to understanding the full extent of what is possible through this kind of restoration work. What you see behind me was once a barren wasteland, with compacted hardpan soil where water rushed off instead of soaking in. There was no organic matter, no plants, and no trees. Now, this landscape has undergone a dramatic transformation. Satellite images from the past 7 years show that areas of bare, exposed soil have literally dropped to zero. This land has fully regained its ability to hold water and support biodiversity, which means the potential for growing food is enormous. The results are so compelling that the government of Niger is fully committed to this mega restoration effort. I got an inside look at the project from the chief forest ranger of the state of Madi, who gave me a thorough tour of the site. He pointed out fascinating details, including some remarkable ripple effects of this restoration work on the greater region. So what I learned was, since we are at the edge of the Sahara Desert, this area is really affected by strong hot winds coming from the desert. This can really dry out the landscape, but this site's continuous tree canopy actually breaks the force of those drying winds. The point is to actually block the expansion of the desert. Niger is one of the hottest countries on the planet. The temperatures are significantly lower in these forested areas, and it's not just deep in the interior of the Sahel where you have all these trees. It's also the edges of the Sahel where we're seeing the same temperature effects. This whole project has become a biodiversity net. All sorts of seeds are blowing in, birds are attracted, and they are bringing other seeds. Right now, we're here in the 3-month wet season. It looks lush and green, and you can see all of the fodder. You can imagine the animals becoming fat. But the critical function of this system is really in the dry season. 9 months of the year, this is dry when there's just not a lot out there. So this diverse perennial polyculture here provides types of foods that can be harvested in the dry season. There are different yields that grow here even during the dry season. They are harvesting plants for culinary purposes and medicinal purposes. We think of the Great Green Wall as stopping the expansion of the Sahara Desert, but it's actually so much more than that. The Great Green Wall is actually rebuilding the ecological matrix of a region. And when we start to see the effects at scale, like this large site and the 528 other Great Green Wall sites in Niger, we actually see the restoration of the ecological fabric of this region. Just within this 800-hectare site, there are 3 million cubic meters of water that have soaked into the ground here instead of running off, and 15% of that water is actually soaking into the deep aquifer and regenerating the permanent water table. The actual effects on people's lives are a very tangible thing. We traveled to a new garden in the nearby village to see the real-life effects of a regenerated water table. Over time, the water table has risen, and there's water available, allowing for production pretty much to take place all year round. In this area where we are, this is just a 1.5-hectare market garden site, one of 9 communities that are now able to produce crops in these gardens because they are pumping water from the ground, water that has been improved from the rising water table due to the restoration activities that have taken place elsewhere. Before this activity, 9 out of every 10 children that were tested were malnourished. What we saw earlier in the market garden, the community is able to produce a variety of diverse, nutritious foods, including vegetables and fruits, which are then also used in their local diets, contributing to better nutrition for the community and lessening malnutrition for their children and for themselves. Over the last 5 years in Niger, an average of 3 million people per year were food insecure and needed food aid. But in that same time period, these resilience projects have gotten 500,000 people off of long-term food assistance. Let that sink in for a minute. 500,000 people are being fed from the 528 resilience projects in Niger. So this is obviously working on a lot of levels. But the big question is, how do we scale this up to the place where it can actually end regional hunger in Niger? In the last 10 years, the World Food Programme, with the government and partners, has restored about 300,000 hectares. When you do this type of land treatment, you're actually helping areas downstream because this water is soaking in. Then, you also get this incredible wind protection effect. So for every hectare that you restore, you actually affect 3 times that amount of land. So the 300,000 hectares really is more like 900,000 hectares. Now, Niger is a huge country. The Sahel is a massive area. So this is still just a fragment of what needs to happen here, right? We're beginning to see a scale of solution that matches the scale of the problem. Walking through this, you can imagine that you're walking through the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall is the possibility of transforming desert lands, degraded lands, into food baskets. Now, the vision is how we can collectively put all hands on deck and make this regeneration in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Sahel, in Niger, an unprecedented game changer. The World Food Programme supports these projects in a lot of ways, including equipment, training, food, and money for the people doing the work. This helps to stabilize the community while growing their natural resources. We can do this together with our partners. The government of Niger has taken resilience as their strong vision to transform rural areas in the country. This is very important within the context of Niger in terms of the concept of the land becoming the nourishing mother of the population. It's basically saying that as WFP, we need to recognize that we can play a catalyst role, we can play a supporting role, but the biggest role and the biggest achievement is what communities are actually able to do by themselves. We really need to be engaged and motivated within the vision of the Great Green Wall. It means also a great green wall against hunger. Subscribe now and become a part of Expedition Diaries for more.